Welcome back to another quick review, another book review at that. Today we are talking about Assassin's Quest by Robin Hobb, book three and the final book in the Farseer trilogy. And I got things to say. I have opinions. I have thoughts. And ultimately, what this review is going to come down to is a whole lot of negatives that turns into a positive rating. If you understand what I mean. But if you don't, we'll get there. So, I'm mixed on this book. I think this book is weird. This book is mad weird. Um, I think it ultimately, in the most simplistic terms, this boils down to a good book, but a bad ending to a trilogy, or a not ideal ending to a trilogy. Because it's not a bad end. It's not a bad ending. I think the best part about this book, and it's been the best part about the other, two books that up until this point. But the best part about this book is, of course, Robin Hobb's writing and I'm sorry, Robin Hobb's writing and her character work and her how she creates these complex characters and these character relationships with one another, despite how weird certain things get. Because everything with Fitz and Verity and Kettrick aside, right? Um, that has always been the strength of these books, and it's the strength of this book. I'll go on the record to say that I'm not the biggest fan of Night Eyes. I know people love Night Eyes, right? I'm not the biggest Night Eyes person, but I think that relationship between Night Eyes and Fitz is phenomenal. It is a great relationship, despite how I feel about Night Eyes as a character. I'm not as nothing against the character. I'm just like it's just kind of just a little bit lackluster for me specifically. Um, but I, where I think that this book kind of falls apart, or not falls apart, but lacks in, is that it doesn't feel like an ending. It doesn't feel like an ending to a trilogy. And I think a lot of that is how I perceive endings to trilogies, endings to anything, right? But even then, for this book, there was a moment in this book, and I never had in the the year it was. I started getting back into reading after so long. Back in January of 2025 is when I got back into reading after years of not doing it, of not reading as often as I would, or as often as I had. This was the first time where I considered not finishing a book. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that the first 40 to 45% of this book is so slow. It is a slog to get through. And I think a lot of that, why that's so unfortunate, why that kind of threw me off so much was not even so much reading The Will of the Many, which was like a big, very fast paced book, but it was coming off the heels of Royal Assassin, which I think out of every book in the trilogy has the best pacing. I gave Royal Assassin a 10 out of 10. I adore that book. I think that book is great. So coming off the heels of Royal Assassin, where we had this momentum of everything that had happened in that book, Assassin's Quest just kind of slows to a halt. It slows to a crawl, and then at every point that you think that things are start to speed up and quicken, the book just goes back to slowing to a halt. Like the people described it as just traveling the book. It is exactly what it is. It is traveling the book. And there are a lot of and there's those traveling scenes can be interesting. I specifically think of the quest of find Very specifically with Catracan and Cattle and Starling and Night Eyes and the Fool and whatnot. I think that traveling was enjoyable. I think there was some other traveling that was enjoyable in there as well. But a lot of it, especially towards the beginning with like Just Fits and Night Eyes, was not my favorite thing in the world, right? Some of the character relationships before I get into like my biggest issue with this book, some of the character relationships, how things panned out are weird. Like Bjork and Molly, like I guess, I guess, man, I disagree, but I guess, sure, whatever. Everything with Starling was weird. I don't even need to bring up Fitz, Verity, and Catrican. That's an entire other thing. This entire other weird thing. Everything just it just kind of came down to, yeah, man, I guess whatever, sure, whatever you say, Ramadan. And my biggest issue with this book ultimately is the plot, and some of it has to do with pacing, some of it has to do with how things feel, how it doesn't feel like the ending of a trilogy. I'm kind of repeating myself, but it is just like the overarching theme of how I feel about this book, where there's a variety of things that happen within the last 150 pages of the book that should have felt like that kind of felt like it should have happened in the middle of the book. Because ultimately, I do feel like the ending, the last couple of pages, was rushed. Despite how I think it is actually a good ending. I think it was wrapped up very well. It's a very full circle moment for a lot of characters, especially Fitz at the end, and tying in a variety of things that throughout the entirety of the three books. You know, especially with Fitz describing and whatnot. I actually think it is a good ending, right? And I think that it Fitz finally gets to live out his life with Night Eyes and the kid, or Hap in that regard, which is a very interesting combat, you know, tying in with Fitz and Mishap and whatnot, whatever. I actually think that ending is good. I just think that we sprinted there. I think it's rushed. I think I think a lot of that has to do with the Elderlings themselves and the dragons and Regal, because it takes way too long to get to Verity and the Elderlings and focusing on that. We spent so long with the skill and actually getting to Verity that the moment we get to Verity, it just kind of sprints to the finish line. Like it doesn't give you any. I would argue it doesn't give me at least any satisfaction in the ending. So much of this stuff, so much of the outerlings had been built up in Royal Assassin that we got when we got here. It just kind of felt like we grazed on past them. Like it just we just moved briskly through this. Um, you know, I feel like so much of this book could have been better if a lot of the stuff that was in the last 150 pages were moved to like the middle of the book, and we got more time to deal with the fallout or the aftermath or just anything to do with the Red Ship Raiders. That's one of my biggest things. The fact that the Red Ship Raiders just kind of go away. Like I wish we focused on that a bit more. I wish we just kind of move. There's another that we kind of move on past the Red Ship Raiders without a really satisfying ending, and I'm not the biggest fan of that. I don't really like that, and I kind of felt that that was going to be the case. I think about halfway through the book, I was like, oh, we're not going to get any resolution on this, are we? And not we really. Rada, she could get away with it because there are 13 more books after this, so we could, um, you know, get something about that. But I just feel like everything with the Red Ship Raiders wasn't handled perfectly, as well as Regal. This character that's supposed to be this big antagonist of the entire trilogy, Regal's barely in this book. Regal's just barely around. He's not really a character. He doesn't. Regal never. The thing about an antagonist up that like overarching antagonist that's in the shadows is that you kind of always have to feel they have to be written in a way where they are consistently and constantly a threat. That's one of the reasons why I love Kafka and Final Fantasy VI specifically. Is that post, World of Ruin or post everything that happens in World of Balance, you get to World of Ruin. Kafka always feels like like a looming threat. It always feels like he's there, he's watching you, and he is. That's with how that game is written. I think that's what makes Kafka such a great villain. The fact that he is just looming. Regal never really feels like that. Like there's always the effects of what Regal's doing, but it never feels like Regal is in control. It never feels like Regal is this force that needs to be feared. Like obviously he is feared, but it doesn't come off that way. If I'm making sense, Regal just doesn't feel like an amazing antagonist. He's still like he's still like crazy. He's still high up on that list of characters that I just don't like. But like Regal doesn't feel like an antagonist that is executed that he should be. He doesn't feel like the antagonist that he should be, and I'm not the biggest fan of that. But yeah, overall, And a lot of these, I see a lot of these negatives. The book is still going to get an 8 out of 10 from me because overall, I think it does stick to its landing despite how rushed it is. And it is a good book. It is a well-written book. A lot of the plot points, I think, are good. There's a lot of good plot points in here, just not executed the best or not executed the way that I think that I personally would prefer. But it is a good book at the end of the day, just not a good ending to a trilogy, and that's the overarching narrative around this. But yeah, this book was a lot. It was a longer one. It kind of put me in slump for a little bit. So I'm gonna not take that much of a break. I'm gonna start. I'm just not gonna start the next book today. I'm gonna start the Lies of Locke Lamora tomorrow. So I'm excited for that. But yeah, thank you for watching this quick review. Um, we'll get around to the rest of the realm of the Outlandings at some point in the future, just not now. But yeah, thank you for watching. See ya. Bye.